So, let's see, get my Bible. Hey, people, I'm bringing a Bible today. I had to go find it. Just kidding. I don't think that's true, huh? So I want to read from two texts this morning because it's really going to highlight, sort of bookend what it is I want to share with you this morning. And I love that song. Linda leaned over to me and she said, "This is really neat how all this fits together." Like that song's just a perfect song, right? But that's kind of the way we do things here, or try to at least. Start looking for those connections. So here's the first, I'm trying to find it now, I lost it. But here's the first verse I want to read to you. It comes from Luke chapter 4, isn't it? Chapter 5. And it is, today is, in the liturgical season of where we are today, we are in the season of Epiphany, right? Epiphany came on Thursday, January 6th. As I wrote in my e-blast, most of us were thinking about something else than Epiphany. Maybe Epiphany was trying to break through what we were thinking about. But Epiphany happens is when the wise men discover Jesus. But what happens after that, the first day of Epiphany, is typically the baptism of Jesus. So I want to read this text really quickly. As soon as I find it again. Here we are. So John has been preaching out in the wilderness. And he's been preaching these texts. As he says, he stood and he read to the rest of them gathered around him, and from the prophet of Isaiah, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovering sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." So he quotes from the book of Isaiah and reads this. And then, as the story continues, John finds Jesus, and Jesus comes to where the crowd is gathered. And I'm skipping ahead. And I lost it here. This is what I get for using an old Bible that's very small print. Hang on, be patient. Oh my goodness. I have completely lost my place here where it's supposed to be. All right, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to have to do it from memory. So John begins to preach, and as he's preaching, he's got all of those people gathered around him, and he begins to baptize them in the Jordan. And at that time, Jesus comes up to him, and Jesus says, "I need you to be baptizing me." And John says, "I'm not even worthy to untie your sandals, and here you come asking me to baptize you." But then he baptizes Jesus, and Jesus comes out of the water, and as Jesus comes out of the water, they hear a host of heavenly angels saying, "This is the one in whom I am well pleased. This is my beloved." Now, this is the other text that I want to read to you that comes from Matthew, and it comes from the chapter 25. Very well known. I'll skip down to the end. This is the parable of the goats and the sheep. And Jesus is at the end of his ministry, and so he tells these parables. These, I believe, are parables that he tells in a series of parables about what the kingdom will be like. And this is the last one. He's explained to them that there'll be goats and sheep, goats on his right, sheep on his left. And then he says to those who will be on his right side, he says, "Come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will say to him, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or feed you? Or when did we see you thirsty and give you drink? And when did we visit you as a stranger or come to you when you were in prison or clothe you when we were naked?" And Jesus said to them, "Whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me." So I want to bookend our thinking this morning with these two verses, or these two passages. The first one being Jesus' baptism. Now, We're a non-traditional, unorthodox kind of gathering in here. We don't really do baptism as such. In fact, we're exploring, the worship team and myself are kind of exploring new rituals and new ways of kind of marking who we are and how we see ourselves in relationship to the sacred, or in relationship to God, in relationship to the ground of our being. And so as we think about that, I look back at why baptism was important. And one of the things that it marked was this sense of sacredness, this sense of being set apart. So when God then speaks out of the clouds and says, "You are my beloved in whom I am well pleased," what we often miss is we think it's about Jesus. Everybody there was baptized. God was saying this about everyone that was there. "You are my beloved in whom I'm well pleased." I say that because we often miss it, because we all think that this is all about Jesus. But when you go to the very back of the story, when you go to the end of the story, you realize, no, it was never about Jesus. It was about where we find God and where we find the kingdom and how we participate in that kingdom, because if we are opening our eyes, if we're looking, then we're seeing Jesus, we're seeing God, we're seeing the Christ in the other that is also in us. We are seeing ourselves in one another. So to feed someone else is feeding us. To reach out to someone else is reaching out to us. To care for someone else is caring for us. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist Theravada priest, once said that we carry, without realizing it, we carry the emotions, not just of our own sorrows and our own joys. This last week, if anything, reminded us we carry the joys and sorrows of the world. We literally carry them. They overwhelm us. But the reverse is also true, that we don't realize. The more we pursue our deepest joy and our deepest, truest self, the more it changes those around us. The world begins to experience that too. Do you see how that works? Those two verses basically capture the whole theme of the gospel. Welcome, my beloved. I'm pleased. You're good stuff. Now see it in one another, in everyone else. So when we start on this whole idea of radical friendship, what I'm really talking about is this idea of anamkara, this idea of how do we become soul friends of the world. But to do that, we have to also recognize who we are ourselves. And oftentimes I don't think we are able to do that very easily. I want to tell you a couple of quick stories that are some of my favorite stories. I've told some of these before. Nasruddin Hoja, who is the Middle Eastern fool, comes out of the Islamic tradition, actually, out of the mystical Sufist tradition of Islam. I love his stories because he's the classic wise fool. There's always wisdom in all of his antics. So one day, when he is standing outside his house, it's nighttime, and he's standing outside his house, and he's looking in the window. And he's just standing there, kind of in the hedges outside his window, looking inside, and it's nighttime. And the constable comes walking along, and the constable says, "Nasruddin, what are you doing standing outside your window?" And Nasruddin says, "Shh, be quiet." And the constable says, "Why are you standing out here looking in your own window?" "My wife tells me that I sleepwalk all the time. I'm waiting here to catch myself." Wake up, huh? He's also, once he's been chased by some fellas that he thinks are chasing him. He's being followed. It's on his way home one night, out of the village back to his home, and he feels like somebody's chasing him, and so he finds himself running and trying to hide until he ducks into a cemetery and then dives into an open grave there, an open hole in the ground, perhaps for a funeral the next day or something. And after a while, he thinks they've gone, but then suddenly those people that were following him show up. They weren't really following him. They looked down and they said, "Nasruddin, what are you doing in the bottom of this grave?" And he says, "Well, I'm not sure, but I think I'm here because of you, and you're here because of me." Yeah, you have to think about it a while. One of my other favorite ones was when, of course, the thieves came and they broke into his house. I've told this one, I think, before. He pretends to be asleep. He doesn't notice them. They take everything. He jumps out of the house after they start riding off on donkeys. He gets his own donkey, starts to follow him. He chases them all that night. And the next day, as they get up into a hillside, they finally give up. They say, "What are you doing chasing us?" He says, "You took everything I had. I figure I should come live with you." The wisdom is there, right? The wisdom is in the foolishness. The problem for us is that we rarely recognize the foolishness that we do from day to day. And so we rarely see the wisdom that's there. maybe I should say that again. We rarely recognize the foolishness we participate in day to day. So we rarely see it's there. So yesterday when I wrote, for example, this wonderful e-blast that I really hesitated to do because I was anxious about really just being honest about how I was feeling and that sort of thing. As I did that, I got all sorts of responses. Linda actually helped edit it because my first one had a few words in it that probably shouldn't have been in a public e-blast, you know. And so she helped me edit that down. But here's what I got. I got all these wonderful responses. You guys don't always respond. I responded. Probably 250 people opened it up out of all the folks that I sent to. But I got like 5 or 6 responses. One of them said, I'm mad too. Actually, a couple of them said that. I'm mad too. Thank you for voicing my anger kind of thing. I'm mad too. All right, that's good. Then I also got some other ones that were sort of more accusatory, like I'm mad too because of those selfish nuts on the right, you know, on the right, those selfish people that won't wear their mask, and then they just started kind of belittling that other side. It says makes me angry too, and I said, all right, that's kind of not really what I was doing, and then I saw, then someone sent 2 people actually sent me the parody by SNL. Did y'all see the SNL parody? 525,600 minutes. Did you see that? Oh, Ben's left. Did you see that one? Yeah. It's a whole parody about the insurrection on January the 6th, and it's all a parody. And it's just land blasts that political party over there, right? It just land blasts it. And they said, I don't know if you saw this, but it made me think of this. And they sent me that. And I was like, I don't think that was the point either. I'm not sure, but... And then I actually got a couple of emails that said, it caused me to think about something. And I was like, all right, that's kind of what the idea was. Here's the problem. We don't recognize our own foolishness in order to see the wisdom. And that's the challenge, I think, for us, is to recognize our own foolishness in the way in which we participate in these zero-sum kinds of games. In these games that have either-ors. And so you may agree. You may say, well, that was wrong, and that's not even what I'm talking about, is it? That's the challenge, is to see past what I'm talking about, see past the elements of our participation, the habitual conditioning of our participation, to see past that and to see the bigger picture, which is redemptive. How do we find the redemptive moments here? How do we find a redemptive path here? How do we get beyond polarities, beyond conditioning, beyond affiliation or our affinities, in order to see something larger? And that's so hard for us to do. So I've entitled this particular service, this particular theme, this particular part of the path, Giving Away What's Hard to Give. Because it's not simply about giving away money, which is hard to give for a lot of us. It's not simply about giving away things that I love, though that may get a little closer when we give away things that we love to others. But the real challenge is, how do we give away our attachment? How do we give it away so that we can be present to what's really going on? There's this illustration that I may have shared in the past that I want to share before we wrap things up, because I know we're getting close to time here. A trapeze artist, when they're swinging from trapeze to trapeze, talks about a thing they call the dead spot. Do you know where that dead spot is? When you're swinging up to just a certain point, you have to turn back and come back down, right? But there's just an instant, just a moment, where you are in this dead spot. And if you become attuned to that spot enough, you learn to let go at that place, and the other bar is waiting, or the other hands, or whatever else. It's that dead spot. If you're not paying attention, you miss it entirely. If you do it haphazardly, you run the risk of all sorts of problems. What do we do as people when we encounter these dead spots in our relationships with others? In the memes that we read online, in the conversations and arguments that we experience, in the news we listen to on our channel but we don't listen to the other channels. I mean, where is that dead spot? Are we even aware that it's there? Because you see, that's what I call the redemptive opportunity. That's the moment that we have this chance to be present to something else that might happen. But to get there, we have to be willing to let go of our attachments. These impermanent things that we've attached to because we think they're too much part of our identity, and we're too afraid of what else might be there. I mentioned last week that we operate out of 2 primary emotions. We operate either out of fear or we operate out of love. More often than not, we operate out of fear, except for those things with which we're most comfortable or find most pleasurable, and we operate out of a sense of love. But I want to say that it's not real love. Yikes. I want to say that it's a conditioned idea of love. Because real love is very simply vulnerable humility and curiosity. Another way of thinking about it would be compassionate humility and curiosity. Not charity. Charity is safe. Real love is that willingness to be vulnerable and curious at those dead spot moments where things are really just a little uncomfortable and we're not conditioned enough to trust and let go and move in with more curiosity. Instead, what do? We react. So the first task in learning how to be a radical friend in a world that needs more radical friends, that needs more soul friends, that needs more soulfulness than reaction. The first practice is to recognize when we're reacting, and instead it's an invitation to respond. The first practice, giving away what's hard to give, is learning not to react, but to live out of responsiveness. And the only way to do that is to start paying attention to how we're reacting as opposed to responding. I asked you last week to think about how many times we react out of a fear or out of love. Fear being anger, anxiety, defensiveness, attachment, greed, right? Love being curiosity, openness, humility, generosity. How many times do we operate out of fear instead of out of love? Yesterday I was walking across the grocery parking lot. Somebody came racing around the corner as I was standing there. They were wrong. Right? Now the problem with that is that there was this one dead spot I didn't see. There was this instant moment right before I reacted. But I didn't see that. Instead, I reacted. The invitation that I think life invites us, or God invites us, or the Holy invites us in these moments, is to start paying attention enough to how we react to things in order to find those places we react and to change them, to transform them with responsiveness. Generosity, backing up, making way, paying more attention, asking questions like, I have no idea why they did what they did or who they are. They could be doing things they do for all sorts of reasons. Perhaps if they knew me, they would know that I was here. Any number of things could happen rather than my reaction. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the challenge for us, is to find ourselves on this trapeze that we're always on from moment to moment. But when we come to that place where we are just at that place of encountering something difficult, instead of reacting, we start to observe. We pause briefly in that dead spot and begin to ask ourselves. So I think it's hard for us to recognize when those things happen. So I'm going to suggest this week that you start practicing simply all the places. Think about all the places where you tend to react. It's easy enough. Make a list of them. If you really want to change the world, start thinking about where you react to things. And just make a list of them. And then ask yourselves, how might I respond to these differently? Where is it that I notice this happening where I react? Think about the trapeze. Where do I notice that this has suddenly come to a turning point, and instead I go back to my conditioning and I react out of that instead of reacting out of attentiveness or out of awareness or out of waking up? Because what I think is on the other side of that opportunity is what we call epiphany, is this revelation of something we didn't know. Yes, this past week I did a funeral service, a graveside service that I didn't know the individual well, but I knew his wife. It was fascinating to listen to the stories because Brad participated in this as well. Brad, you guys can come on up on the stage as I'm talking. Brad knew these folks as well, and he played a song. It was a great song called Desperado. It was the perfect song for this service. But as I was telling my part as the pastor, I was thinking in my mind, I have nothing in common with this particular setup, this particular individual, this particular context. Other than being human, I don't really have that much in common. And then I had to stop myself because of my anxiety as a pastor. I'm always worried about never being able to be helpful in the right way because I don't know, I can't connect, I don't have anything in common. And I had to step back and say, I bet there's stuff here I don't know about. I bet there's insights and wisdom here I wouldn't even begin to believe was possible. I bet there are connections I have with these folks that I would never have seen if I weren't paying attention. And before I knew it, I started seeing things and hearing things from these stories and finding a deep sense of connection and even a deep sense of real empathy and sadness, but also joy. And that song, Desperado, made even more profound sense. Bring down your fences. What's that word? What's that phrase? Come to your senses.
You've been out riding fences.
You've been out riding fences, but you need to come to your senses. You know, it's that reality that we have been living a conditioned life. And until we begin to let go of that and to give away our vulnerability, which is hard to give away our opinionatedness, which is hard to give it out, give it away, get out of the way of it. Maybe it's a better way to say that. But to give away our openness and our vulnerability, that's hard to give, but it's the first step in becoming radically friendly to the rest of the world. And as we begin to discover that deeper connection that we never knew was possible, guess what? That's the only way other people start to see it. Amen.